Hello, welcome to the Veritas Automata Deep Dive with myself, Ben Savage, the CEO and founder of Veritas Automata, and we have Dr. Sarkar with us as well. We've been looking at some of the news, which we'll talk about. We've got a couple of new things that we'll talk about, and then we've got a demo. We'll see if my computer blows up or not, since it's only fair when I break my team's demos. I haven't done that to you recently. I think your demos all worked.
Yeah. No, you were in the room and it broke. I remember the demo.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
sorry, it happens. But as we kind of talk about some of the new stuff that was going on, right? There's been a couple new models that have come out. There's been both Microsoft and Google have released some medical specific models where they're starting to train in some specific terms and some of those ontologies and some of that data, which is really, really awesome. And then there's a new version of Mistral Small 3.2 where they've enhanced tool use.
Right.
And we may actually play with that a little bit this afternoon.
Right.
And then what else have you been keeping an eye
on? Again, the medical one that you referred to with Microsoft, we have been trying to stitch that into the tool we showed a couple of episodes back, right, to see how better it is. Because during that time, I think we talked about how important it is to have the domain-specific language tuned into the model, right? Medical, pharma space, and industries like that, they use a lot of acronyms and a lot of different words for the same thing. How does the LLM know that, right? So that coming probably 3 or 4 months back, we talked about, and now we're seeing models coming up. That was very exciting.
Well, and that's a reoccurring problem. Medical is one of the most clearly defined spaces for that. But almost every business that you and I have been in from a machine learning and a data perspective, they have their own ontologies or vocabularies. And you have to think about how you're going to bring that in. And sometimes that's one of the problems you're helping them solve. Because, when we've been in more industrial settings, they may have 5 different names for a part: the official part number, the official part name, what the guys on the floor call it, what the guys in procurement call it, what the vendor calls it, what the MRO calls it, team calls it. It gets a little confusing sometimes.
Yeah, so I think it kind of goes back to the same theory you had a long time back, is that the era of in enterprise environment, the big LLMs may not be that critical, but having the small one tuned to understand the industry language or even your company language, right, becomes more and more critical. Because a large language model trained on a public data set is a mean or a median of the representative, but your company could be operating at tail ends or away from the means, right? And then you start to get very generic answers which are not useful because you don't operate that part of the curve, right, of the data, right? So having Microsoft pushing those models on medical, you will see a few more coming in legal side. I'm sure somebody's working on a lot of those specific areas, right? Would be an exciting
well, and I think legal, we'll have to cover that on a whole different topic. I've talked with some friends in that space, and there's some interest there, but there's also a lot of challenge, and it's around one of the fundamental issues. And this is an article, we'll put a link in the on our LinkedIn for this. The Financial Times had a really nice article the other day about how do large language models work, and some of the things, like, these are inherently probabilistic tools. So if you're going to use it in a case where being right has real or wrong have real consequences, medical is one, but legal is another one. You better make sure you know how to manage its hallucination and track when it is, or make sure it can't give you answers that it doesn't have 100% proof on where did it get it.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an ongoing challenge with a lot of these probabilistic model, because ultimately a lot of it is dice rolling and which paths to take, right? Again, it's not completely random. It's driven by the data which was used to train it, but it's still, there's an element where your dice would roll to a tail end when it would hallucinate if it can't find certain things, right? We spoke about importance of having data cleanliness, readiness, red teaming, those all play towards building a more repeatable process down the line.
And just documentation of how the system works and the ability to validate it, right? I was a little bit too old for Harry Potter when it came out, but I ended up reading it because it was the big pop culture buzz thing. But there was, in one of the I think it was one of the books, they talk about, don't ever trust anything if you can't see where it puts its brain, where its brain is, right? With a lot of machine learning and particularly GenAI type solutions, that's really, really important. But I would say, hey, I don't have to see where it keeps its brain, but I do have to understand how was it designed and how is it validating its data. That's got to be something published for me to be able to have some trust in what it is.
Even access to what data was used to train that LLM can build a lot of confidence around Because if you look at any machine learning model, it's predicting parts of the token that's being fed in, right? If you have visibility on what was fed in to train this thing, you get more and more confidence that it's not pulling from unknown and public sources.
Yeah, or if it's a RAG, where is it finding its source, whether it's graph or traditional. But all of that gets to the way, and we were talking about some of the security and some of the jailbreaks last time about some of the new ones that came in. But all these, they're not even necessarily you don't have to, no one has to have ill will to necessarily accidentally trigger these. We were talking about a news story that we'll post as well from the Register the other day, where there was someone who was, they were vibe coding their app and they built what they thought was this great thing. And one of the problems that we've all seen as you continue to have AI work on a code base is it sometimes refactors in ways you don't expect, or refactors when you don't ask it to in different ways. And he ran into a lot of issues with that, including this individual where unintentionally he was kind of jailbreaking the model, and it was doing instructions that in theory they said it can never do, like deleting databases.
Correct. And I think it was a production database that it kind of completely wiped off. Again, it's you got to build safety net around a lot of these things, right? Again, it can take a path, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally. It just understands your question wrong or the request wrong, and it goes down the path, right?
Well, I think all of it says, hey, even if you're using these tools, you've still got to use good practices around them, right?
Yeah.
How are you checking your code? How are you managing your code? How are you making sure you've got backups? How do you know when you've got different merges in, so that if you need to roll a merge out, you know when it came in and how to go do it.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that some of these vibe coding tools make really easy not to do. Not necessarily unintentionally, they're just trying to make it easy for people.
Right.
But that creates its own double-edged sword.
Yeah, and I think we were looking at another project we were working on, and we were trying to see how good it is. And at one point, it decided to refactor the entire code base, and then it went in a completely different direction, and it forgot what the original requirements were. Right? Glad we were pushing the code and committing so we could roll back, but it was like one of those moments, like, what is it doing? Trying to solve this problem, but it completely forgot something else.
And I think context, even as they keep making context windows larger and larger, that's still one of the challenges, is that you don't know where in the context window it's going to actually pay attention.
Correct. Yes.
And particularly as you go deeper and deeper into something, you have to augment these models with memory or with other tools so that they can keep the plot, is the term I'll use, and they don't go completely off the reservation.
Right. And I think a lot of the MCP servers are, probably pretty popular these days. There is a push towards MCPs having its own memory that it can share, and the queries you have asked in past. Even if you're a multi-agent system, MCP sits in the middle, and they are looking at the same data to help coordinate some of that conversations between agents, right?
Well, and I guess if the agents are on the other side of the MCP, that's what's connected to large language model, right? And let's step back for everyone. The MCP is Model Control Protocol, which comes from Anthropic. They introduced it in November, and there was a big buzz probably 2-3 months ago, and it's still continuing around it. And it's basically a way for large language models and other tools to interact with each other.
Right. It's been called the USB-C of the real world, right, when LLM gets to really interact with the tools.
I like the fact they're using USB-C than USB-A, because that means at least you don't have to plug it in wrong 3 times.
Yes. Yeah. So the whole emphasis was that when LLMs came around and the function use came, that was really wonderful. But people have to train or build the queries such that it can talk to an API, and it has to be done every time for every API integration. With MCP, that's kind of centralized. So they build up like a protocol where all of the vendors have decided that we're going to use this. I think Anthropic started it, now OpenAI and a few more vendors have joined the effort inside.
Yeah, and it's I know it's a little different than an API, but it's essentially an API for tools to be able to go work. And that way I can build the tool once, and if I want to have it talk to OpenAI or Claude or use Olama, there are different tools that will allow me to go do that and make it very, very easy to go do.
Correct. You just have to be careful that your LLM has a tool calling enabled, or it has been designed to have a tool calling function.
Well, it's got to have tool calling, and then particularly if you're using the open source tools, you've got to understand the quantization, right? Because a lot of those models you can get in, several hundred B parameter
Right.
one, and you can get like a 72 and a 32 and an 8B. And you may find at certain sizes, the tool use has been lost from the tool because it just didn't survive the quantization.
Right. That's pretty cool. You want to show the demo because you have a live.
Sure. Yeah, as we've talked on the podcast in the past, I'm a little bit of an atypical Gen AI user, and that I don't use the cloud solutions that much. I do use them, but I tend to either be working with sensitive data or I tend to travel a lot, which means I'm always looking at solutions. What can I run on my local computer? So recently I've come up with identified a set of tools I can use, so I can run a Postgres database locally. I can run an MCP locally, and then there's a interface for AI for Gen AI tools I like called Bolt AI. And it's basically, it looks kind of like ChatGPT, but it's an app that runs on my computer and it lets me interact with Olama. So what I've been able to do is take a MCP server that talks to Postgres, my Postgres server, and get it all working together. So right now, what we've got is a sample data set actually of federal grants. Actually, I've got a couple data sets in here, but the one I'm going to work with is the federal grants data, just because it's an interesting data set to go play with. And then what I'm doing here, if you notice, I'm using Qwen 3.8b, which is I'm trying to use the smallest model so I can get the fastest response, right? Because that's the thing you've got to think about as you're kind of building these tool pipelines is, okay, how much time is it going to take for all of this to run when it goes through? So I'm going to pull up a pre-typed question because I am a horrible typer, and this will be slightly faster. And then we'll start going into a little freeform. And this is all live, by the way. So
Did we share that screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, cool.
So now I'm going to enter that query in. And while that's running, yep, it's being shared. Cool. We're going to see it's going to take a second because this is all running on my local machine. This is a M3 Ultra or something like that. And it's going to tell me it doesn't like the question. Okay, so we're going to go back to a slightly different variation of what I was doing. Just a second. Because I break demos. Okay. We're going to try and make my chat a little smarter, because if you notice, I did not have a system prompt, and now I do.
And this is using the Qwen 3.8b.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's see if I get a slightly better response. This is a data set we got off Kaggle, by the way, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the things that...
there you go. It's
yep.
talking to the MCP server there.
Does not mean we're going to get an answer, but it means
maybe. It's just first step.
Yeah, this is always a challenge. And this is one of the things I was talking with Saurabh, is that we're going to throw this on our GPU server eventually and see how much of this is the MCP and how much of this is the LLM responding and all that.
Yeah. But the good thing is it's talking to a real database, right?
Yeah.
Any of the LLMs, it's kind of pulling from memory, but here you could have a live database data coming in and out all the time, and you're getting answer real time from this database.
Yeah, this is using a real SQL Connect.
Exactly.
So, and this evolved from Ben is too lazy to remember how to do his SQL queries to me starting to prompt the SQL model to go say, hey, what would a SQL query be for this? And then dropping it into a SQL tool and going from there.
Yeah.
There was, why do I even need to do all this? I can just prompt it in the model,
right,
or prompt it in the tool. So we'll see.
It wrote some square.
It gave me a SQL query, but it didn't actually do what I want. So, okay, let me just go remember what the name is. You all are going to get to see how bad a typer I really am.
In the world of LLM, spellings, do they matter anymore? I don't think
sometimes. Actually, sometimes it corrects my spelling and tells me that you spelled it wrong, which I don't always need. We'll see what it does. And I probably still spelled something wrong. No. It's still going to annoy me because I did spell something wrong there.
And you had mentioned that some of the other model like Mistral Small or some of the like Devstral, are they a little bit better?
I found if I'm writing SQL, Devstral was actually pretty good.
Okay.
If I was having it write SQL queries to help me. Mistral Small, I have not tried that because that model just came out last 2 or 3 days. So I haven't tried it that much. Otherwise, Qwen 3 is one I tend to use quite a bit.
Yeah.
In theory, according to Olama, like Granite and Microsoft Phi are also tool calling, but they're not working right on my system. So I got to go figure out Granite 3.3, the most current version of Granite. And again, I was trying to work my way to what's the smallest model I can use? Because again, right, with an LLM, what do you really need from the model? Do I need to understand how to ask the question, have enough understanding of basic SQL? Yes. Do I need it to be able to write the Great American Novel? No. So smaller model, faster response.
Right.
So we'll see if this works. I always get nervous when it asks itself multiple times because I don't always know what it's doing. Looks like it's asking the right stuff.
It's exploring the database.
Yeah, I made the mistake on when I was using a larger data set that had like 1 million records and I asked it, tell me what trends you find.
Yeah.
I did have to just stop it.
Look at that.
It did what I wanted. I did have to stop it because at 1 million records, it was just, I don't know what it was doing. And this is one of the things I need to figure out is how do I get better instrumentation so I know it's actually thinking and hasn't just gone off. Okay. So now based on this, let's go ask a little bit more detailed questions. So let's say, so for the month of August 2010, which is a specific month, so I want to go see, let's go. So yeah, it's just a general question you're exploring data, right? So I want to go say, okay, based on these, what's the count for all these? And I'm asking for a specific month that I happen to know is in the data set. Now, there's actually 3 data columns here, so date columns here. So I'm going to be curious what it does. Normally, I've been specifying a more specific one. So I don't know if it's going to choose created, last updated, or completed.
Okay.
So we'll see what it comes back with, and we may have to ask it for a second.
Imagine doing this in a BI solution, right? You would be, trying to create a report, learn all of the, where are all the filters, trying to set the trend range. It's going to take you longer than.
No, it's going to take you longer than that. It's going to take you longer to go just write the SQL query than ask the question.
Yeah.
Because, and particularly like you and I have been doing some analysis for, that were more statistical. And we had to do like mean and mode.
Yeah.
And like to write a query that does mode is kind of a pain in the butt.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Average mean is pretty easy, but mode.
Yes. Yeah.
Or like some of the stuff we were doing on bucketing. And here I can just ask it to go do it. And it goes off and does it.
Absolutely.
This is where we need some
absolutely.
random music we can go play.
Imagine this being on your phone. You as an executive just asking a question on the fly. Wow, look at that.
Yeah. So now I've got this. So let's say I want to go see, what's a small data set? So I happen to know there's a table in this, or a field in this table called description, where it's going to go through. So let's see if it gets the right ones. Because this is where I've run into challenges when I've been playing with this, right? This is where there's a certain point where you keep asking questions, and as a human, you're kind of going, I track, right? I asked the question of this database, and now I've been building this data out, and there's going to be a certain point where it's going to lose the plot, and it's going to tell me, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no table that does this.
Some of it is probably trying to I don't know how it's summarizing the previous conversations, but
Yeah.
One thing we'll notice is getting smarter and responding better as it was successfully answering that, because I think it understood
to a certain point.
Yeah,
to a certain point.
yeah.
But this is also why I've got that system prompt, by the
Right.
way, lists what are all the columns in the database,
Right.
and it lists the specific schema and database it's using.
Yeah.
And then it's got a quick description for them.
Correct.
And that was kind of done the hard way, right? Because as I was going through, when I had some of those words that were similar to but different than the column name, because it didn't know what the column was.
Yeah.
This is like anytime you bring in a new data analyst, right? If you don't have a good data dictionary, they go look at it and they go start going, well, I think this is this, and I think this is that. And before you know it, they've done something bad.
And you're using something.
This did not work here. Let's regenerate and see if it runs again.
Okay.
See, I knew I'd break it at some point.
It's all right. It's writing SQL. SQL can be not forgiving of a language, right? So
that is true.
If you have hallucinate one dash somewhere, or uppercase, I don't know if this case sensitive or not, but
SQL's case sensitive. Well, it depends on what you're doing, right? And SQL is a really good way to write something really bad that takes a system down, because you get into an overly cardinal.
Right. But this is great. They did a count and all of that stuff, right?
Yeah. No, this is where it's like, this has got me more excited than some of the other stuff. This has almost got me more excited than some of the code writing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us spend a lot of time working with data, and like, how do you quickly go through and work with it?
Yeah.
Particularly as data sets get large.
And you might be thinking that, do we need to put system instructions every time you do this? Probably not. If you are, because this is off the shelf, something you pull down and trying to tailor it to your data, right?
Yeah, this is completely off the shelf. I think if we were going to really be trying to build some of this is where we might be talking about that agentic approach, right?
Exactly,
where you've got an MCP that's bringing the agents in, you've got an MCP that's talking to the database so they can go do it. And some of that.
That's because if you're, if you're setting this up in your own company, then you know the data sets and stuff. Oh, wow, look at that.
Okay, so it did give me the.
I think it came up with its own thing. Is it pulling from the table?
Let me. Remember that whole trust but verify we talked about in the beginning?
It feels too verbose to be in a database. You never know.
Sorry, I'm off screen for a minute, doing a quick check here. So just give us a minute. Okay. We're making sure the model is not telling stories to us. And the answer is, we'll share a different screen real quick here. We think it's lying to us.
He's not lying. He tried real hard and pulled something from his memory, knowing about grants, I guess.
So here, sorry, I've got, admit, you may be right. You may be right, because I may be on the wrong column here.
Yeah, that's the title. Yeah, it should be description somewhere. There you go, grant.
There we go. Okay. Okay, Saurabh, I'm going to give you credit. I think maybe it's not completely.
You tried to enrich the answer from a paragraph to a page long, I guess.
Well, some of those are pretty long, it looks like.
Yeah.
So. Okay. Okay, I'll give it more credit than I previously thought.
That's pretty good.
We need to go play with this some more, but the key point is,
do they have like grant values and stuff in it?
Yeah.
So maybe I will throw in a hard question. A data scientist would be able to do it. Find any outliers in that period for that category. Is that could be an interesting, see how it handled that, because SQL doesn't have an outlier detection system built in unless it does some kind of a percentile or something.
What's the name of the column with the value? Because I'm blanking on that.
Probably can scroll up and. Okay.
So Funding information, clues, award ceiling. A word I know I can't spell. I'm using earmark to
Yeah, absolutely. See,
just to try and keep it where it's only looking at like 5
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
several hundred.
because you don't be able to. Yeah.
Okay.
Go
Let's see.
through
It's
100%.
thinking. We have not seen it go fire off the SQL query yet.
It's a hard query to, for a SQL to figure out outliers.
Well, it hasn't even gotten to the SQL yet. It's the key,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
Right,
I
right
mean,
now,
yeah.
we're
we're pushing the limits on this, right? Hey. Oh,
okay.
wow.
Now it's got a SQL query.
Okay.
Baby steps. I still want to go through those in detail and see how much it was making up.
Yeah.
That just feels too polished.
It is too polished.
I do think having the data structure
Right.
helps a lot in the
Yeah,
system prompt to help it go
Yeah.
off. But that would be
Mhm.
however you're building your
Pipeline,
query, your
basically, yeah.
pipeline, that you would have that query or some kind of memory or
Yeah.
something for it to go
Yeah.
do it.
You could potentially look at the view results to see what call they made, right? So you can. This. Okay, it's just pulling data. Looks like it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
We'll see. We'll see if it melts my computer down or not.
It's
But no, I
not-
think the key thing is this is starting to be an interesting tool
Right.
from more than just a programmatic standpoint.
Oh,
Okay.
look at that.
So yeah, see, remember what I talked about? Sometimes it loses the plot. Sometimes it just gives me a SQL query. It doesn't actually give me the results.
Is it a valid though? Maybe copy and run it in your things.
Okay, so what we're doing now is something questionable safety.
Yeah.
We're going to go run a SQL query that LLM just created.
Good thing is it's a sample data set, not production data.
Yeah, well, it's again, right? It's the benefit of liking to run it all on a local.
Okay. Let's see if it works.
Let's see.
It hallucinated some.
Yeah. No, it's not wrong. It's just the way my system is set up. There we go. I have to make that correction once more.
Oh wow! Actually,
Yeah, let's see if it runs.
it actually ran.
It ran.
Didn't give you anything, but it did run.
Okay, so the SQL query was valid.
Okay, that's a valid query. Okay.
Okay, well, we'll take that offline and figure out.
But what it just did, it's kind of a cool to see that even without like access to pandas or Python or anything like that, try to figure out, of just using SQL, which is very, very hard to do. Just try and running the SQL, right? That was interesting. So that's an early MCP, right?
Yeah,
So
that's only an MCP, right?
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
I think there are some more LLM-enabled versions of like Jupyter notebooks and stuff that would probably take that next level and get to pandas. This is just, I'm using the, we'll put a link to it as well, the Crystal DBA MCP.
Gotcha.
There's a bunch of them out there. This is the first one I tried and it seemed to work with the toolkit that I was using. And again, my use case was I want to run everything on my local device. So as I'm trying to analyze data and I'm on a plane at 30,000 feet, I don't have to go remember my SQL.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can get bogged down by a syntax error and you forget what you were trying to accomplish, right? It gets in the, refining the tool itself rather than getting to the answer. But if it gets to you an answer real quick, I think it's BI tools on steroids at this point, if you're looking at it, because often you would get an question in your mind, and it's either figuring out what is that chart showing, which fields it is pulling from. It could directly show that, right? So
well, and that's the next thing I would love to have is a tool like this where I can get the data and say, hey, go give me a chart, right? Because any of us who've worked in Excel, right, particularly if you're a recovering consultant, you can make Excel do a ton of different things, from data analysis to showing all kinds of graphs. Many things it does, it should not do. But if you put enough effort to it, it will. And like that visualization piece is always the next thing that you get to is, okay, so I know the data, but what's the picture look like?
Right. And the MCSB is not just limited to Excel or databases. You are unlimited in terms of interaction, right?
Well, we were talking about a use case that you had this morning where someone was looking at an MCP to call another LLM to expand a query, right?
Correct. Yeah. So, let's say an MCP has a complex maths problem solving ability, right? But when you get a question, it's a little bit complicated for it to solve. It calls another LLM to break it down, right? So to break it down into smaller chunks, then it solves it and combines and sends it back. So again, these are emerging topics in MCP world, but I see that as a plus because now you can easily integrate with weather, maybe ticket booking, availability. You can do a lot of things without having to have a browser integration and all that stuff built in, right? Maybe the software of the future will come with like today it comes with API enabled software. It will be MCP enabled software stack.
Well,
right?
and I think APIs will always be there too, right? Because an MCP is in most cases just a wrapper around an API.
Right. But,
So, and I think we were talking about some other news that we kind of went down the MCP path, but we were talking about some new stuff in image recognition earlier today.
I think AllTrack is the one you were referring to probably. It was very exciting because we have been looking at computer vision for probably 7-8 years now. And, typically we do tracking based on maybe a soccer ball or a human being and all of that stuff. But the paper that that just came out is doing at a pixel level. Is tracking across the image how the pixels are getting tracked, right? It was interesting to see,
and you were pointing out, we were running these on some sample video we had. And you were pointing out just the difference between here at a static shot and how it's tracking it.
Static in the sense the camera is static, so player are moving around and you can see the outline of the player at a pixel level, how they are kind of moving through the frame, right? So shows you that piece of it. But the other one where the camera is handheld and you see almost like the players in a box, and basically that represents your frame, how your point of view is changing. That was very, very cool to see that how far it has come, right? So it's interesting because there's a whole world of AI which is beyond LLMs, which are in computer vision, traditional ML, that the advancements are being made as well.
And something like that's interesting for some of the work we've done for tracking people and things and movement within facilities or locations, both for security and for other workflow kind of triggering.
Correct.
And then it's also interesting when you start to think about applying GenAI to video, right? Because if I can track where those characters are now, I can isolate them and I can start to do transform on that part of the image.
Correct.
And that's kind of where some of the Facebook segment anything comes in. And this is a video approach that's really, really cool for that.
I mean, the best application for a video approach is like, the Indiana Jones, the swapping of the statue, right? For a traditional model thing that, which is just there to detect whether there's a presence of that golden statue or not. But with this thrown in with the LLM, you can ask a question, does this look nefarious or is it doing something funny? Right? So those outliers would be caught.
I don't know if it's going to really be able to detect.
Well, if you have a sense of humor, maybe never.
Would Indiana Jones life been easier if he just had a set of augmented reality glasses and he goes, don't touch this, movie trapped? And would he have listened?
Yeah, well, maybe not. Maybe not. But I was thinking a little bit on the computer security side of the thing. If you feed a footage of somebody leaving maybe a briefcase or something and pretending to, in a way, they're gaming this. I think in finance we call it like kiting in transaction, which is you seed this system with small transaction in a certain pattern, and then you hit it with a big one because it's pre-seeded. It thinks it's already in pattern, and it lets you pass those barriers, right? And
it's always a challenge with self-learning models. There are ways, if it's self-learning, where they can kind of do some of that thresholding.
Right. So similarly, in security or computer vision, you could have these already, seeding setup, right? And LLM being, sitting on the top could potentially detect certain things. But again, it probably has to be a multimodal, custom trained model doing certain things specific way, right?
So here's a question.
Yeah.
With that model, could we teach it to play Doom?
Maybe, but if we show it enough footage of the Doom, probably it will understand it, right? I think I've seen some of the multimodal LLM describing the scene frame by frame, and
Yeah.
then
Well, that's how we were playing with those early things. At some
Correct.
point, I want to come back to those, but we were
Yeah.
playing with those early where it's playing like Street Fighter.
Correct,
Right?
yeah.
It was describing it.
the scene on the
Yeah.
top of it, right? But again, describing a scene probably is a low fidelity, I will call it, or low bandwidth. It's kind of just telling you, but
High fidelity but low bandwidth, right? So it's going to be able to give you a lot of information. It's just going to be slow to go do it.
Possibly, but again, if you're sending a frame through the LLM, it's only going to pay attention to some cool pieces of it, not everything. But
Yeah.
with at a pixel tracking level, you can see if there's a small enemy sliding in the back, trying to circle you from the back or something. Maybe a CS:GO kind of a setup, right, where somebody's hiding and trying to circle you to get to you, kind of a setup, right? Those they may miss it again, maybe because you want to have limited context window where it's paying attention, all that stuff. But start to mix traditional computer vision with LLM, I could be an interesting setup for sure.
So I'm going to go back and ask one last question on MCPs, and then we'll close it out. So for MCPs, they still send your data somewhere, right? They don't process the data in the MCP itself. So it's not a way to get security or confidentiality.
You could run your own MCP servers and set up. So think of, let's say you have a database like this. It's completely local. You set up an MCP running, right?
But it's still sending it to the model. So if I were to use OpenAI with this instead of Olama, it would be sending my data.
Correct. I mean, if anywhere in your pipeline, if it is in a cloud, then it's going out.
Yeah.
But if you're using a local LLM, a local MCP server, there are a bunch of libraries out there, Fast MCP being one of the popular, very easy to set up. You could set up your own MCP server and have the Olama talk to it. Then it all stays in-house, right?
Right. If you're running local models,
Correct.
But if you're using Claude or Anthropic or OpenAI and ChatGPT and using those, because those can all talk to MCPs.
Correct.
At that point, it's no longer keeping your data in-house.
If your OpenAI writes a script, select star from this finance table, it will dump that data and send it out to the cloud directly, right? So if you're concerned about security, you gotta bring the LLM also back in the house, right? So
or think about how do you prevent manage the data leakage.
Correct. Yeah.
So takeaways on MCPs, they're cool. They allow large language models to go interact with other tools, and other tools could be another large language model. It could be a database, could be a custom machine learning, whatever that tool is, you can invent it. And then they're not magic bullets either. They still don't, unless you run everything local, they don't keep your data isolated.
Plus, I think the push nowadays is around the security as well. Who can talk to the MCP, the authentication token and all that stuff? Is it a rogue LLM trying to filter data out of your system or not? All that is still
that's a really good point of how early these are in their phases, right? It makes it easy to go talk to stuff, but it doesn't stop it from talking to things it shouldn't.
Correct. So right now, the state of the MCP, I think it's still very, very nascent, right? So a lot of things have to be solved, and probably some of it is already solved, as we were talking about around the security of it, right? The other one is RBAC based. Who has access to it? I think we showed a demo a long time back. People have access to certain parts of the data versus other, they don't get the answers. Flow that into the MCP servers when you're pulling the data as well could be an interesting setup as well to see.
Cool. Well, we appreciate everyone joining us. We will have some more conversations in 2 weeks, and thank you all.